everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicola Corzine, and I am the Executive Director of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit dedicated to helping entrepreneurs from all over the world realize their big, bold visions and grow. We are going to be opening up for Q&A at the end of today's event, so please do make sure you submit your questions in the Q&A function, which you'll find right at the bottom of the screen throughout this presentation. And before we get started, just a moment to say thank you to all of our amazing sponsors, donors, and foundations that make this work possible. None of it would be enabled without their generous contributions, and for them, we're truly incredibly grateful and thankful. Now, during these unique times, we are curious how our entrepreneurial community is doing, and we've got a series of polls that we're going to launch now to kind of help us get a sentiment onto how you're feeling in these very difficult times. So to do that, I'm going to launch our first poll up here today that asks you to just take a moment to share with us, if you will, how you're actually feeling. When we first started entering into the pandemic, understandably, most of our entrepreneurial community of over 35,000 were feeling incredibly anxious and really aiming towards hopefully a surviving mode. Over the last 6 weeks, we've been encouraged and not too surprised, given that we are working intentionally with entrepreneurs, to see a healthy return to optimism. And I'm thrilled to say that today, that is certainly true here too. We've got about 43% of our respondents right now leading the charge of saying optimistic, although still understandably a lot of people concerned around how are we going to navigate in these times, and especially with today's topic around fundraising and fundraising options as well. So the next thing that I'm going to, the next poll that I'm going to put up in front of us right now is basically asking you to share with us, if you will, your biggest challenge right now that's keeping you up at night. We certainly hope you're all getting really great sleep, but many of our entrepreneurs understandably are struggling with some pretty heavy subjects. One of the reasons that we ask you to respond to this, and I'll end this poll in just a moment and let you share what has been reflected in today's audience, is twofold. First and foremost, this actually helps us build curriculum, workshops, classes, toolkits, and provide mentorship around these topic areas. So you may know already, but the center actually builds responsive programming based on our entrepreneurs' real needs. So to the extent that you're actually able to share this information with us, you'll see this reflected in our upcoming programs. And today, again, not surprising given the topic that we have at hand, a healthy number of people looking at finance, sales, basically anything on that revenue line or those financial lines leading the way. Also with team and just again surviving, which we can certainly understand given the challenges of 2020 and beyond. And the next poll that we're going to launch is very specific to today's session, and our amazing panel are going to be reflecting these results in some of the content that they share with you and the insights and perspectives that they share today. So what we're going to ask you next is to kind of share, if you have raised capital, what type of capital have you raised to date? And feel free, you can select multiple choices here, but would just like to get a sense as to those joining us today, where have you had success? Has it been from traditional methods? Some would assert venture and angel being in that environment. Certainly self-funded, non-dilutive fundraising is always moments to celebrate where possible. And so I'm going to go ahead with most of our audience at this stage having responded and share these results, which again, I think are very interesting given the time. A lot of our audience today, the majority of the audience today, reflecting that self-funded has been the way that they have had to go to date. But equally, friends and family and angel investing and VC leading the charge is a bucket up here. And I'm definitely curious to learn about the other that people have selected. In fact, if you would be so kind and you fell into that category of identifying other as a source of funding, feel free to share what that other is into the chat box. We'd all love to learn, beside you, what are additional sources of fundraising success that our entrepreneurs are turning to in today's market and climate. All right, we are getting there. Everyone is doing incredibly well, I promise. The next poll that we're going to sort of ask you about is the type of capital in a dream state that you might like to raise given a choice. We are throwing up on the screen sort of 3 traditional areas, and then that inevitable other category: grants, equity, debt, and other. So if you take just a moment to sort of vote up your preferred type of capital that you'd ideally like to raise in 2020, that would be incredibly helpful. And I will go ahead and share It's kind of, oh, I'm going to keep it open in just a minute or two, in part because I'm curious to see who's going to be the front runner here. Equity slightly, but perhaps not that surprisingly, grants, non-dilutive funding for a large number of us are leading very closely as a happy number 2. So let me share these results really quickly, and then we will pop to the next poll. Hopefully everyone is enjoying sort of seeing these results as much as I am today. The next poll is, just a very quick yes, no. Do you actually feel that you are aware of all your funding options available to your business right now? Do you think that you know all that you need to know around what options are available to you? Given that many of you are joining us today, I think you're probably all fairly curious to learn about all the options that our amazing panel are going to be addressing today. And so probably not that surprisingly, about 80% of our audience are saying they do not feel that they have all the information that they would like to have when considering funding options for their business. And guys, I promised we would close. This is the last poll that I'm going to launch, and then we're going to kick off with this amazing panel joining us today. And this is asking what stage of revenue you're currently at. Obviously, some options of fundraising are more available, more pervasive, depending on the different stage of revenue that you're at. So just getting a pulse check for our close to 100 people already that are joined on this webinar to understand what stage of revenue you're at will be incredibly helpful. I will let this go to just a moment, and then I will pop over and share these results. For our panel's interests and for our own, for the others joining us today, we've got about 55% that are pre-revenue right now, and a healthy 30% that are already beyond the 100K to about $500,000 mark, and then about 10% of our audience in the 500K to $1 million, and 5% at the 1 million plus. So if anything, hopefully you all walk away going, everyone's in it together. I think everyone is here to learn today. Everyone is very much in an environment where we're all excited to try to figure this challenging 2020 climate out and some with our amazing panel. And so without further ado, let me introduce them very, very briefly. If I can invite our panel to pop off a video and unmute yourselves. Our first great panelist today is Desi Stark. Desi is the Senior Vice President of Business Banking at Bank of the West, an amazing partner of the centers. She's been with the bank and growing its impact since 2017. Now, prior to her career in banking, Desi was also an immigrant founder who built and sold her company that she started at the age of 19. She's truly an innovative business executive with broad-based experience in operations, in business development, and motivational leadership. She's a proven ability to nurture relationships with her clients, to increase value against multiple channels. And so we're really excited to have Desi with us today, learning beside her experience, both as founder and now in this amazing role that she leads at Bank of the West. Desi, welcome. Melissa Bradley is joining us today. She's the co-founder and managing partner of 1863 Ventures. She has over 20 years of entrepreneurship, investment, and leadership experience, and is truly committed to serving founders of color with diverse backgrounds. She is the co-founder of SMB platform Eureka and a professor at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University, where she teaches about impact investing, social entrepreneurship, and innovation. Melissa has significant startup experience herself, amazing numbers of investments in emerging companies. She's truly an expert in board leadership and engagement, and is also an aspirational golfer. Always good to know. So Melissa, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us. And rounding us out, another amazing colleague of ours that we're so humbled and inspired to learn beside. Gwen Edwards is the managing director of Golden Seeds. She's also the chair of the Angel Resource Institute. She brings over 30 years experience in technology, market leadership, ranging from telecom to mobile software networks, from R&D at Stanford Research Institute to product development, sales, marketing, and general management at Fortune 50, to being the CEO of a VC-backed company as well. Gwen is known for her true customer advocacy efforts, whether to obtain input early in the technology development process, to lead stellar sales efforts, or to build the strong kind of linkages that are needed between stakeholders and strategic initiatives. Gwen, it's always a pleasure to welcome you back to the center. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, so with these amazing women beside us, let's get started in trying to uncover what kind of fundraising optionality all of our attendees may find themselves with despite the pandemic and despite 2020. So on that note, let's start off. There are incredibly wide array of different avenues for fueling founder growth with resources and capital. Can I invite each of you to speak a little bit to what you're doing right now to fuel company growth in these efforts and in these times? Gwen, maybe I'll open it up to you, and then Melissa and Desi round us out. Does that work? Okay, Gwen, start us off.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm very involved investing through Golden Seeds, where we focus on women and increasingly people of color. We've been actually putting together more efforts in that regard overtly. We have chapters now in Atlanta and New Jersey, New York, all over the world. I mean, all over the country, sorry. And we are, I would say, doubling down right now. Our activity has not slowed during COVID. We actually thought it would, but it has not. We've been very active with our portfolio companies, of course, but also appreciating that there's even more interest and need right now. So our membership has continued to grow, and we're just very active. I think Zoom has actually helped us. We see more national deals. We're able to streamline more effectively, and we've become more cohesive. I'm very involved in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and co-founded the local chapter here. But again, it's just been really richly rewarding to our members, and I think those applying that we've been able to do more nationally.
Yeah, we have heard that theme actually present itself over the last few sessions in different ways. So it's great to know from your perspective, angel investing is definitely open to that trend as well. And maybe Melissa, that's a great avenue to sort of turn it over to you. How are things going right now? What kinds of deals are you seeing and doing and getting involved with? And how is it going across the nation from your perspective as well?
Yeah, so I think luckily at 1863, we have always been focused on what we call new majority entrepreneurs. And so I would say the biggest thing we've seen is a massive amount of inbound calls of people trying to learn and get engaged. And so we have been privileged to have lots of examples and lots of stories to share to really help them understand the financial viability of investing in entrepreneurs of color. So I'd say the first big thing we've been doing is just increasing our advocacy and being invited different places to really talk about our success stories. The second thing, because we've been investing in these entrepreneurs for a while, but officially started last year, we actually have found we're sharing our portfolio metrics, albeit then minimal, with other firms because they realize that they don't know how to evaluate these entrepreneurs. We had a pretty large bank who started a venture firm that said, I'm struggling because I don't even know what the right metrics are. And I said, yeah, you cannot compare a Black female founder with a white male. And so we have found ourselves being able to be a resource, which I think is a way that's creating this multiplier effect of helping mitigate risk, but also adequately inform other investors, our peers, on what does it mean and what is a portfolio. Ours is performing very well. What does that look like moving forward? So that's been a tremendous honor. And then I would say we're trying to just increase our internal systems so that we can move faster. The statistics show that 50% of businesses of color have closed. And I would say that, for folks who don't understand my community, that's not abnormal. We tend to have cyclical opens and close because our survival is tied to capital, which is not as fluid as the West Coast and Silicon Valley. And Gwen and I have had some of these conversations. We also see it's not as fluid in the international community. So we're trying to be much more aggressive in our investing. We're closing more rounds of funding. We are identifying peers for us to work with and actually serve a leadership role in that investing. So I would say a lot of our work has been advocacy and leadership in this space so that we can both effectively harness the interest in new majority entrepreneurs, but more importantly, send the accurate picture and description of what does it mean, what are the risks, what are the outcomes, and most importantly, what's the upside that we've been able to see for years.
I love that. I love that. And some amazing nuggets there that I am excited to be able to come back to later in the conversation to hopefully unlock even more insights towards, Melissa. Desi, obviously tied deeply into California businesses and not dissimilar to any state. Wow, our poor businesses have certainly gone through a lot in 2020. What can you share both at an optimistic level and also at a little bit of a reality level that you're seeing when it comes to the financial and funding support that your industry is tackling right now, both in state and maybe nationwide, to the extent that you can cover that.
Thanks, Nicola. First, I want to say to everybody, congratulations for starting up a business, surviving in this bizarre times. I am privileged to speak to you today because I admire all of you. I have been in that position before as an ex-woman entrepreneur. I know how difficult it is. I know how much courage and perseverance and grit it takes to survive in business. So now back to the question. I have not actually noticed any difference, and this is going to shock you. Yes, these are very peculiar and very difficult times, but Bank of the West is one of those banks that is kind of niche-y. Yes, we have consumer banking and business banking, but our niche has always been business banking. We have survived the recession, the previous one, the 2008, and I think we have, history has taught us a very valuable lesson that we can continue doing business even in a recession like this one. So we haven't really drastically changed any of the rules. Bank of the West never really shut down. I know a lot of the conventional banks out there did exactly that, and rightfully so, because we didn't know what to expect. We have never been in the situation. This is an unprecedented thing. It's a worldwide, it's global, so it's scary. But we never really, Bank of the West never really shut down in any shape or form. And I do see businesses, a lot of the businesses and business entrepreneurs out there restructuring and changing their business model so quickly so they can survive, so they can last this bizarre time. And it was just incredible to see, because in the last 6 months, I have not seen our business diminish in any way. In fact, I see companies out there, because they were so smart and so quick to restructure and change their whole business model so they can accommodate these times, they're actually making even larger profits right now. So I was very grateful to participate in the PPP program. Obviously, Bank of the West helped tremendously with that. There were quite a few sleepless nights there, I have to say. Me and my whole team, but it was just an incredible thing, because I was so great. It was such a gratifying experience to help everybody with whatever we can and give the money that the government was providing as quickly as we can. But Bank of the West hasn't really experienced, yes, we had to adapt, we had to change. We have invested tremendous amount of money in technology because our whole team is working from home. We're all equipped with something that is faster and better so we can accommodate our clients. I work with an incredible team of people here, and I'm really proud of that, because everybody jumped and was so passionate about helping our clients and prospects that it was just an incredible sighting to see. I believe that in crisis times like that, people actually team up together to help each other. So business has been actually unchanged for us to some extent. We also partner up with a lot of different organizations. Thank you, Nasdaq, for organizing this. We obviously, Bank of the West partners up with Nasdaq. We do partner up with Pulula as well, which is a crowdfunding platform for women in business. I'm really proud of that. That's led by my boss's boss's boss, Michelle DeGangi. I have to give a shout out. She's the one who gave me a chance and hired me 4 years ago. So we have some incredible women here that are passionate about helping women in business, and we continue to believe in the purpose of the bank and helping our clients. I think that's the most important thing right now, to just pay very individual and specific attention to everybody and help with whatever we can.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect segue to sort of realizing that for many of our entrepreneurs, as they reflected in that poll, they have been self-funded to date. They're considering exploring, should I go out, get grant funding? Could I even try my hat at getting venture or angel funding right now? And I think it starts by helping lean into a little bit of the experience each of you have around what it takes to be fundable, or what are the traits that you really look at for these tenacious business leaders that are represented here. Melissa, you sort of showcased a little bit of the disparities around how do we know who is a venture backable entrepreneur of color these days. To the extent that each of you can kind of share some of those skills or attributes that you look for in great entrepreneurs that have been successful in raising in these times, could I invite you, maybe Melissa, to start off this dialogue and walk us through, what do you look for in backing great leaders?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure that it's different now than before, right? I think some of the, I think there's been a different percentage or weighting of those criteria, right? I would say resilience has always been one, and that has probably moved to the top of the list, above industry expertise right about now. We look for basically four things. So we've always looked for resilience, and I think now even more so. And resilience also somewhat coupled with innovation in terms of how have they been able to pivot. We've been pretty clear that we are shifting our weighting in finances, that we're looking heavily on 2019. We're probably weighting about 20 to 30% on 2019. 2020, probably 20 to 30%, and then really spending the rest 50 to 60% really focused on where are they trying to go and why do they think it's going to happen, and their ability to do scenario planning in case it goes off the rails. We obviously look for folks who have industry experience. I wouldn't say expertise, just because we don't have a plethora of female Black CEOs of large companies, but folks who clearly know what they're talking about. And have some sense about what the trajectory of that industry is. And then the final thing I would say is, do they know their customers? And I would say that's really still up there. I think so much has happened, and we still don't know what's going to happen with the economic pandemic and the health pandemic and the wildfires and race relations. And so we're mindful of what are the systematic ways that the entrepreneurs are tracking and understanding who their customers are and their ability to be responsive, because that's essentially what has saved so many entrepreneurs through the past 9 months right now.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Really tactical advice, and that scenario planning goes a long way. Gwen, I having worked beside you, I know you believe all too well in the value of owning the revenue and understanding that revenue flow. What other attributes kind of jump out to you right now as far as the qualities that you're seeing of both amazing women and just amazing leaders break through that need of closing on dollars in a pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting that classically people talk about the importance of the team, and there are all these sayings about the team. There used to be the expression, an A man with a B plan is better than a B man with an A plan. So substitute woman and person of color. I mean, it's so clear, but I have to tell you, I didn't really get that until I started investing. I thought I would invest based on my background and networks and software and tech, and I've done very little of that. My first investment was B2C and in a subscription service, and it was because of the team. So I found myself actually experientially realizing how important the team is, and the team that knocks my socks off and others. I've seen people walk into a room and have nobody respond, and I've seen people walk into a room and have every single hand go up that says, we're interested. We want to do diligence. And every time it's the room where every hand goes up, it's because that team has been able to articulate, not only with energy and excitement, and that comes from their knowledge, but their passion, but they've been able to articulate the needs so clearly, and that they've talked to the 100 customers. If they don't have a single one who's yet placed an order, they know that value prop and how it resonates, and they understand what they're building. They can be capital efficient. And yes, how is that going to translate to revenue? And how does it translate to value to the audience, ultimately the investor? But it's so much about realizing the team is everything, because you fall in love with a business model and a plan. We know for sure it's going to change within a year. Even if there's no pandemic, something happens. It's just time after time. We keep thinking we've seen it all. And after 10 years, I think I've seen it all, and I haven't. I get thrown off so often. And I think that's true with entrepreneurship. You're thrown off your game. Even after you're in it 5 years, something happens. You're like, oh my God, how did this happen? So I love, Melissa, your comment about resilience. It's just so much about the team. And I think you'll know as entrepreneurs listening when you're ready, but you want to have your ducks lined up so that you're not caught off guard in a Q&A session. I actually encourage people to have their diligence done, like they actually know what questions are going to be asked. They have it filed electronically. They know what a cap table is. They know answers to these questions. before they have a serious conversation, other than with a friendly, investor friend, giving them advice. But don't go out and pitch till you know you can answer those questions, and then you're golden.
No pun intended.
Right.
No, I love that. I just have to lean in a little bit, because I think for many of our entrepreneurs, there's a little bit of this mythology that prevails around, like, should I show up with like passion, and should I show up with energy, and should I show up with like that authenticity? And it's really inspiring to hear, Melissa and Gwen both lean into the fact that, we need to see that, you need to see that in order to really be drawn to the entrepreneurs. And so to the extent that, credibility and transparency and passion and purpose can come to the forefront, not because it's being dressed up, but because it's legitimately real, and why all of these amazing entrepreneurs joining us today are doing this in spite of all the other things that they could be doing. That's what investors need and want to hear. So thank you for encouraging that sentiment, and for encouraging them to show up with that commitment as well. Desi, I want to flip just for a moment over into what can sometimes be a very confusing and uncertain time period for our entrepreneurs, and that is figuring out when is the right time to even maybe go to a bank and start a loan process. Can you walk us through a little bit more of the details around how an entrepreneur begins that, and even more importantly, perhaps for this audience, knowing when is the right time to potentially look at that as an avenue for fundraising or fundraising enhancement, depending on how the case may be?
Yes, thanks, Nicola. I have to say, if you ask me personally, I agree with everybody. Passion is a very important ingredient in everybody's, when you're starting a business, in everybody's desire to start a business and continue a business. I also have to say that being aggressive is one thing that I value tremendously. And the third thing is, and this is, I'll give you some secrets in banking that I think we do say it out loud. Most people don't believe in that, and how valuable it is, and how much weight it actually carries in the whole loan process, and working with women entrepreneurs and small businesses per se, and startups. But one thing is, never take the first no as an answer. If you get a decline by any bank, it doesn't matter what size, larger bank, medium-sized bank, never take the first no, because there's always mitigating issues and mitigation that could be incorporated in the whole loan process. So you can explain a few things, and then, because think about the underwriting process. We have underwriters, they're human beings. They actually think logically. They look at numbers, but they also look at the individual. They look at their organization skills. They look at their FICO score. All that actually incorporates in the decision-making process if we're going to be giving somebody a loan or not. But I have to say also, one thing that a lot of conventional banks actually are looking for is loyalty. Just like when you're developing relationships with your clients, we want the same thing. We want to have relationships with our clients for the long term. We play the long game. This is not a transactional thing for us. We just don't want to give you one thing and then forget about you. That's why in business banking, in my channel, I have a relationship manager assigned to every relationship. And they do call you occasionally every 3-4 months and say, hey, how are you doing? How is business going? How can I help you with? So it carries tremendous value for us to have a long-term relationship with each client. So my advice to you is, if you start your business today and you've received your federal ID number, the first thing that you have to do is run out to a big conventional bank and secure your future and open up an account. It doesn't matter how small of an account it is. You could put $50 in there, but this is the start of a relationship for us. And sometimes down the line in the future, when you actually can come back to us, and so we can, what we call in our industry, bankable, that carries a tremendous amount of value, because we do value relationships. And the longer the relationship, the better, in a better position you are. You better position to actually continue our relationship and continue with us for the long run.
Amazing. And we know the power of relationships. That's something that Melissa has already kindly sort of shared through. On the note and the importance of sort of being a great relationship builder, Melissa, what's the advice that you're giving to entrepreneurs that you're both funding and maybe not yet funding right now? What are you telling them to really be doubling down on from a diligence perspective around outreach or efforts when it comes to fundraising in 2020?
Yeah, so one, I think, just to build on what Desi talked about, is use their social capital, right? Use us, use other folks that they've met, because there are a plethora of entrepreneurs out there who have received funding or who haven't, but have some good stories to tell. So I think one is identify peers that can help you on this journey, because you are going to hear no's. To Desi's point, it's hard sometimes to hear a no and get back up on your feet, but that's going to be important. I think from specific metrics, we've been saying to really understand what happened in 2019. And if that was a high year for you, how do you get back to that? If that is a low year for you, then what does that mean as the economy has gotten lower? So that's been one, really to understand your history, because I think too often we focus on when we're raising money current and present, but the only precedent that we're going to have and that you want us to have is what happened pre-pandemic, and then also how you've survived now. I think the other piece is be honest. I just was talking to an entrepreneur the other day, and they were trying to like over explain why some things had gone awry. And I was like, stop. Like, the world is darn near coming to an end if you read the newspaper. So like, it's okay. And so I would say be honest and be vulnerable. I look at this as I don't expect any entrepreneur to actually fulfill more than about 40 to 50% of what they present to me, because we just don't know how the world's going to change. So I've already discounted you by 50 to 6%, not because you're bad. I just think we just don't know. And there's so many fixed variables and inputs that are probably going to change. What I am focused on is how have you been able to manage change? How fast have you pivoted? How quickly did you ask for help? Because that's going to be our new normal, at least for the next 24 to 36 months. So that's also been helpful of their willingness to say, this is not working and here's where I need help. I think too often they think I am a check, as opposed to I'm a check that actually enables them to be able to go purchase all the things they need. And I'm here to help them know what are some of those next steps. I do think, though, others is, changes in your monthly run rate, because that's going to, part of our financing is both convertible, but also revenue based. So repayment is going to be critical. And I'm sure banks are going to have the same concern. I would say, what has happened to your team if you've lost some folks? What happened to intellectual property? I do care about what happened to them personally, but what happened and what has happened to that part of the business and how will it be rebuilt? And then a final thing I would say is, let them know how you're doing personally. Now, I know that's not going to play for everybody, but if they ask, be honest, because most of the time this has been a very quick turnaround time period. And we have found that with our entrepreneurs, they have obviously been more impacted by COVID, but unfortunately, not just for themselves, but for their family members. At one point in time this year, our cohort, 40% of our cohort had a parent who had contracted COVID, and they were the primary caregiver. And so that was helpful to us, because it understood how they were going to participate, how they were going to be responsive. They said, look, we are deeply committed to this, but let me just tell you how I've worked it out that I'm still present. And so I think that they want to do that so that we don't make wrong assumptions if we don't hear right back from you in 24 hours, or if something comes across and it's slightly askew, we realize, what, life is going on. So those are the things that I would say we're looking for. And not much has changed, but there's been some tweaks in terms of level of empathy, compassion, and timeliness, because there literally is so much going on.
So insightful there. So insightful. Now, one follow-up question, if I can, before getting to the next one, and that is on that capital bucket. I mean, you talk about, obviously, fundraising in this time being more timely in some regards. What are you encouraging entrepreneurs, if anything, right now, Melissa, to think about with the number of or the amount of capital that they're raising? Are you trying to get them through to a certain point in 2021? Is it still based on let's get you to that next milestone and try to, decrypt as much as we can around the uncertainties of what it's going to take to get you to that milestone?
Yeah, a lot of them I'm saying nothing less than 6 months. And for some of them, that's mostly folks who have just recently made the pivot, because I don't think they have enough traction to sell for a higher number, honestly, because they've just literally moved everything online. For everybody else, I mean, historically, I've always said 12 to 18 months. I'm probably now saying 12 to 24. And I think a lot of that is, again, how long has it taken them to pivot? What has that done to their margins? What has that done to their fixed costs? I think a lot of them have seen their financial models turned upside down in this period, and they're still wrapping their head around it. And so you want to make sure you have enough money to think. as an entrepreneur who received venture capital, that is probably the greatest gift of that type of money, is that it allows you to think. It's not a loan where you've got to think about every month and faster, which is not a bad thing, but that is one of the few upsides that I've seen. And so you really want to make sure that you're not on the fundraising wheel, which is challenging, emotional, draining, everything that you can think of, and really just give yourself time, because the only way anybody's going to respectfully and appropriately respond is being able to think about it. To your point, do scenario planning and really think about different options. And most importantly, talk to other people who probably maybe a half a step ahead of you, few steps ahead of you, even behind you, so that you can just figure out where do you sit and where do you start to double down on some of your changes, and where do you need to still keep thinking about some of those adjustments you made in your business model.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Now, speaking of not being on the proverbial fundraising wheel, Gwen, in addition to doing the amazing work and leadership that you do at Golden Seeds, you're obviously part of the tremendous leadership coming out of the Angel Resource Institute, somebody and an organization that has been tracking and looking at alternative structures to some of the more traditional ways of raising capital for a while. Can you share some of those models that you've seen that are being successful again in 2020, and any that may be cutting edge that you're inspired to see how they might work in the coming months and years?
Right. Yeah. No, it's so interesting. Being here in Silicon Valley, it's kind of a different world than the rest of the country in many ways. But also when you go to other parts of the world, what's really become very clear is we tend to think about an exit as just being sold. You have to sell your company or you have to IPO. Those are kind of the two basic options. And I don't honestly know how many entrepreneurs really are deeply aware of that when they go out and raise just angel money, or let's just do a convertible note or a safe note. I don't know that they really are deeply thinking about what that decision means to their life and to their company. Are they willing to now sell their baby? Do they know that they just signed up to do that? And is that their dream? Or do they want to build a legacy? Do they want to build something even for their family, for their community long term? So it's that thinking that caused me to start looking at, well, what are some alternatives? And they are ranging from, one of the more common that's become quite popular is lighter capital. They're doing really well, making loans, but based on 5% of your revenue. So if you have a bad month, you don't pay much. You pay 5% of what you had. If you have a great month, you're going to pay more. So it's not like a mortgage with a fixed payment. It varies based on your revenue. That's been really popular, especially for experienced entrepreneurs, but anybody with high margins, high revenue growth, and high margins. So I would just encourage people to think about, as a template, when you look at your own growth curve, can you imagine peeling off at the top line 5%? You could play with that. Maybe it's 8%, maybe it's 4%, but kind of peel off as though you're thinking of adding that to your cost of goods, and then project that out over 5 years. And people are starting to do that. And that's really, really interesting. There are organizations like NDVC, they're doing cohorts. I know Melissa's given thought to this and doing some work as well. And I've been doing this with entrepreneurs. And inside Golden Seeds, we've also been very creative with options where somebody has a licensing model. So it's very capital efficient when you get to a certain point. So we've structured an opportunity where there's an annuity from that company. So these are examples. There's one in real time we're working on that's an enterprise software company, but they have already contracts with major entities, government organizations, municipalities, large enterprises. So that kind of revenue is very predictable. So we sat down and said, gee, maybe you want an option here. So it's everything from purchasing equity that then the entrepreneur agrees to sell back at a certain price point per share, and giving the entrepreneur and the company, the investor, optionality. So thinking about windows, maybe in 3 years, a little bit could be repurchased. Maybe in 5 years, even more. End of 5 years is a golden point in time for an investor, because if they hold that equity for 5 years, there's no capital gains right now on that investment. So that is factored in. So we basically can sit and kind of use a toggle and look through the lens of the entrepreneur's financials and then help them see, well, what's possible. So I would just encourage people to start thinking differently. And you're in a position as entrepreneurs, you can actually approach an angel or others. This isn't a venture model. You can approach angels and say, I've thought about this. Here's some ways I can provide a very interesting return to you if you're interested in that, other than traditional, wanting me to exit and sell my company. And I think you'll find increasingly people are open to those ideas, especially if they come from you. And it's just worth familiarizing yourself. I could go on and talk about this for a long time, as you know.
No, there's been a couple of asks that have popped up in the chat. Are there any resources or any blogs or any articles even that Ari or Golden Seeds has written up, Gwen, that you'd point to that can be good sources for people to get creative around exit strategies here?
Yeah, boy, I'm going to write a blog. You've got me now.
Okay, all right. And we can even promise to follow up in our follow-up note. We can maybe include a couple of links that are inspiring to you, because I know in the past when we've done workshops like this, you have a great list of those types too.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, entrepreneurs. We promise we'll follow up there.
Okay, because I can give you a link and we can send some out.
Amazing. That would be great. Thank you, Gwen. And I guess for everyone else, just to really slow down, to pause on that for a moment, I think two things really to lean into. One is realizing you can't shy away from the conversation of making sure that your exit strategy is aligned to your investor strategy, right? Those two things do have to be dovetailed. You can't forget to talk about that piece or shy away from it. And you should be able to dream state it too. You should be able to figure out, is this aligned to what I believe in and what I'm striving for as an entrepreneur, as a founder of my company? And is it matched to the investors that I'm targeting and seeking out? And I think secondarily is realizing that we're all kind of making this up as we go. And so you do have a couple of variables. Your XY axis may change. It could be like the time that you're holding to the amount that you're returning. But those are very critical layers that you have in your control as well to imagine exit scenarios. So get creative. Entrepreneurs are great at getting creative. And I think when Gwen and I look back to the last 5 years, what is now out in the world is really inspiring and 10x what it was 5 years ago. And we can't wait to see what the next 5 years and 10 years, Melissa, Desi, Gwen, I'm sure all of us agree to that. Like the best is yet to come in many ways. I think the world is still figuring out the right options and the many varied flavors of right options for the many varied flavors of amazing entrepreneurs that build solutions we need in this world. Okay, so let's get back to the realities of the current solutions out there. And Desi, I know for our entrepreneurs that are already generating revenue, one interesting angle for them to consider, perhaps potentially, that I'm sure some have thought of, is around factoring. What advice can you offer to entrepreneurs that may already have some revenues coming in and the benefits or the challenges associated when it comes to factoring?
Thanks, Nicola. And I'll talk about a couple of different options, actually. Factoring is very specific and is very expensive. Because I tell you, when you are running a business, the most that you can do is save as much money as you can. So when you go out to a bank and you get a loan, a conventional bank, is only because it's a very inexpensive way to finance the growth of your business. Now, if you're not at that stage yet, then factoring companies are another good option. And I'm not going to be talking, I'm going to be talking to you as an ex-woman entrepreneur who this is how I actually build my business, because especially the first couple of years when we were generating some revenue, but we were not exactly profitable and it was a brand new business. Factoring is a very suitable way, just because what they do is you ultimately, they give you an advance on your invoicing. So if you're selling any services or goods, you're probably invoicing some of your clients or vendors. So that's what factoring companies do. They're organized in a very specific way, and they have an approved list of vendors that I can buy from. But they usually give you an advance up to, I've seen companies like Comdata, for example, would give you an advance up to 90%. And then on the back end, they collect from your vendors. Now, it's sort of expensive, but it does help your cash flow, especially to survive this pandemic. I think it's a very suitable way of just generating cash flow and going through these times so you can have operations and operational cash, so you can move forward. Now, another way, and now I'm going to put my hat back on as a banker. Actually, let's talk about shoes because I don't really wear hats. But as a banker, a second way that I actually envision is when you think about credit cards. And I know that's another very expensive way of generating cash flow into infusing cash flow, but there is a big difference between business credit card and a corporate credit card. Now, when you think about a corporate credit card, yes, it shifts the liability to the entity, to the corporation and your business. So that's the preferred way. But for that, you need to have financials, you need to have tax returns. So if you're not at that stage yet, business credit cards are not a good option. I actually survived the first 6 months of my business only based on my business credit cards, and that's envision it as a personal card that you just put your DBA on it, your business name on it. Yes, it's not a very expensive way, but it does help through difficult times like this ones. Now you need to have, and I'll get very specific here, you still need to have good credit and good FICO score in order to do so, but I'm assuming most business owners already have that. So that's actually a really good way of getting some cash flow into your business. So these are expensive ways. A third option is obviously CDFIs. If you need a small capital line or just a small infusion, CDFIs are another amazing option. Please reach out to me. I can provide a list with all of our partners, CDFIs that we work with. And in addition to that, I think what's valuable about CDFIs is also they do provide education. And I like that about them because they function like an incubator pretty much. So you can get a lot of basic knowledge on accounting and financing and just pretty much hand holding while you're growing your business. So CDFIs are another really amazing option.
Perfect. Well, I've got one more question that I want to pose to the group before asking for your final takeaways. And then we're going to open up to some of the great questions that have been coming in during this time. That question is this. I think all of us here wish that capital was more equitable and accessible for all. And I think this year especially has highlighted some of the challenges and also some of the opportunities to make a better dent and a better difference in doing just that. What do you think, to each of you, it's going to take, or what are you inspired by right now to see more accessible opportunities for our diverse female founders and our diverse founders in America and across the globe? Melissa, obviously knowing this is perhaps one of the biggest missions as to why 1863 is there, can I put you on the spot and ask you to address that? Sure. And then Gwen and Desi go to each of you next.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think there's two important things that I think are putting us on a nice glide path to some real systemic change. I think, well, actually three. One, I think that there is a such thing, unfortunately so, but there is a demarcation where I would say a significant amount of people who were unaware, I'll say, of what was happened. And so we have a date called post George Floyd, which is sad and tragic, but it was an awakening that I think we needed. I think the second thing is that there are tons of folks like myself and others who either explicitly or implicitly have really been supporting women and entrepreneurs of color for years. And people are finally asking us for the data, and we have it. And so we have data to show what is the longitudinal success. Why does it cost Black entrepreneurs more to start the same exact business as their white peers? What are the inputs beyond finances that are needed? And so we've been willing to share, but people are finally picking up the phone and calling us. And then the final thing I would say is that we need to push, though, for transparency and information. So there have been moves that PitchBook finally collects race. I think we cannot be afraid of it. We need to embrace it and just own that there are systemic barriers that make it different, but it doesn't mean it's not worth tracking because we don't want to face what really is going on. And I think that that's where there's a great opportunity, that there are more and more investors of color that are coming to the forefront. There are more and more mainstream funds who are coming to the forefront and actually having a carve out because it costs us more to start the same business. We have systemic barriers that slow us down. So you can't expect the same level of returns in the same amount of time. You can expect the higher returns, but in a slightly longer period of time. And so those carve outs are going to be critical. And then the last thing I would say is just general openness to learning and hearing. I've been surprised that we have not been able to apply the same level of failure within VC that we have in other communities beyond Silicon Valley, but we have to know that everybody's path is different. And so at least that conversation happening has been a great, I would say, lightning rod to motivate, but also keep us on track, because it's going to take some time.
Thank you for your work and inspiring, Melissa. Gwen.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think there was a sea change. I believe it's going to be sustainable, but definitely after George Floyd's death. I mean, it was palpable. We had meetings inside Golden Seeds where, I don't want to sound corny, but people were moved to tears as other people with brown and black skin became open in sharing some of their own experiences. And I think it's just been a deep awakening. It's been very emotional. And it's no longer an intellectual exercise. It's about realizing that there are people in our country that are suffering, deeply suffering, and have been for a long time. And I think many of us have had such a powerful gender lens. We see everything in gender. And oh my God, like, where are all the other nuances? It's not just gender. And so that's piling in to how we're perceiving opportunity and need. And so it's changing immensely. And I think, I'll say somewhat naively, at first I thought, well, gee, we know what worked with women versus men. It was getting more women to become investors. And boy, has that needle changed from 04 to 2019, 2020. We've gone from 4% to almost 30% of all angels are women. So I thought, well, how can we do the same thing for people of color and women of color? How can we shift that needle? Well, it's easier said than done. It takes people willing to have that crazy amount of risk. Now, we might mitigate that with some of our new alternative structures for investing. But, and that took women 15 years, 16 years, 04 to 2020. We don't want to wait that long. The world can't wait that long. So we know we have to do more and differently. But we also, I think we're very aware of the causes. And I'm so grateful for people like Melissa and others in our midst. Yeah.
And you, Gwen, for sure, for holding these conversations. There's importance to holding the conversations and showing up for the long run. Desi, let's invite you to sort of share your reflections from within the bank and from within an area that I know you are personally passionate around as well.
So I have been in corporate banking for the last 12 years, Bank of the West a little over 3. I have not been with any other organization that talks about diversity and inclusion as much as Bank of the West ever since I stepped foot here. And that was so shocking and I was so pronouncedly proud about it, because I'm a woman and I'm also a minority because I'm obviously a foreigner. So that touches my heart in such a way that, because that's the culture of the bank. In case you didn't know, our CEO, Nandita Bakshi, is one of the very few women CEOs in the banking world. Actually, I believe that there's only 2% women that are CEOs in the banking world, which is, we're still so much behind when we talk about women in leadership. But I am proud to also say that a little over a third of our leaders are women at the bank as well, which makes me feel extremely not only grateful, but just passionate to continue the conversation, because it does start with a conversation. If we don't talk about it, then the issues are never going to surface. So I'm extremely proud in the culture of this company, because that conversation, ever since I've been here, hasn't stopped at all. And that makes me feel so incredibly positive for the future, because if we don't talk about it, nothing will ever change. If we don't talk about our issues and problems as human beings, nothing will ever change.
Great. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 4 minutes of rapid fire. Less is more, guys, as much as possible. And I know we're not going to get to all the questions. I wish we could, but let's give it a shot. So first of all, line of credit. You guys for them, against them? There's been some people that are sitting there going, I think I have this option. Should I take it in addition to doing other fundraising strategies? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Yes, always.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
Take it, take it, take it. Thoughts on foreign investors, some of the challenges right now, whether they are industry or whether they're sort of socioeconomic or even diversity of our entrepreneurial base, worrying around, am I going to find the right investors here? Any concerns with looking outside of the US for investors in this market? And if so, any advice on how to do it well?
I would say one, talk to accounting and tax folks in terms of understanding the implications of foreign investment. I think it's great, but rules vary state by state. And so I would say whether it's foreign or not, you don't want to pay more for the money than what you get, right? The cost of capital, there is always a cost. And so I would say first do the analysis to see if it's worth it. And then the final thing is make sure it doesn't take you out of your current comfort zone or current stride. If you already have investors, you don't want to have to go through a whole nother round of negotiations with them to be able to get this to work. So, you know, you got to balance all that with, is the dollar amount worth it?
Smart, very smart. A couple of our companies that have identified themselves as B Corp companies. Are there special opportunities or special challenges around fundraising as a B Corp from your experience? Are you open to them? Any shifts or suggestions you could offer?
I would say quickly, only because I teach this at Georgetown, make sure people actually understand what the heck they are. I think there has been so much information out there that people just assume like I'm never going to get my money back. So I think one is, you know, think about creating a one-pager that helps them understand from a purely investor perspective. Don't tell me how great it is for the environment, from a pure investor perspective, because I would say that's where respectfully that community has fallen down. They've only really positioned as an ESG. That's not relevant for more direct investors.
Very, very wise advice. To the extent that anyone here is comfortable in sharing, a couple more questions pertaining to CDFI options for our companies that may also be trading cross borders. Gwen, how do people go find, or Desi or Melissa, how do people go find a good CDFI source for them? And is there any good resource that you can point people to for figuring that out? I think Desi, you'd offered maybe to send a list so we can include that for sure in follow up, but any other tactical advice we'd offer here?
And are these for inside the US?
US and Canada specifically was one question here. So trading, hiring across borders, Gwen.
Yeah, we partner up with different CDFIs. If anybody can reach out to me, I can definitely point them out or connect them with our internal partners that partner with the CDFIs, because they're obviously geographically assigned. So definitely reach out to me.
And I would actually encourage people to check out CNote, capital CNOTE.com. They're enabling CDFIs. And if you reached out and just indicated what you're looking for, they could also potentially be a resource.
Awesome.
They're having international conversations as well.
Perfect. Perfect. Another good resource coming at us hot off the press today. LGBTQ. Are there any specific thoughts that we have around specifically going after funds that identify that as a priority, or even addressing and bringing this up to funders at the appropriate times? Thoughts, suggestions, insights?
So as a fellow member of the LGBTQ community, I would say this is one of the hardest things. And if they want to hit me up afterwards, please do. I think that it is just as hard to come out to an investor as it is sometimes to our parents. And while we live in the age of new awaken and enlightenment, I'm not sure about that. So I think for someone like myself, people say it's pretty darn obvious. They look at me and I'm pretty clear on social media. I'm married, we have kids. I think you got to figure out and really suss it out. I think you may have a great associate who has no issues. And as it rises to the ranks, I think regardless of what type of investment, if you check a box, any box, look at their portfolio companies, talk to other entrepreneurs who may know them. And then I would say, particularly for LGBTQ, check out Start Out. They have amazing resources, and see if that particular firm has endorsed or signed up or supported them in any particular way.
Yeah, we love Start Out. They're amazing.
You can shout out for Gaingels, GAINANGELS, out of New York.
Perfect.
Great
Perfect.
guy runs it. It's a fabulous group. They're
Amazing, amazing. Okay, one last question, and then unfortunately, I knew our time was going to go so quickly in this rapid fire. The last question coming in, I think, is a fair one, and one that is critical for us to address. Raising that first bit of money, whether $5,000 or $25,000, is sometimes the hardest, especially if we're not fortunate to come from friends and family who can underwrite that check. What has been your biggest success or your biggest recommendations that have worked for entrepreneurs to raise a little bit of money to get them going? By a little bit, people are saying, is it crowdfunding? Should I look at some other aspect out there? Like, how do I just get those first few dollars into my business? Suggestions?
So I know Gwen has opinions on crowdfunding, so I'm going to leave that to her. I would say that, and forgive me because I'm going to alienate some people, but I would say anybody who is a female, a member of the LGBT community, or person of color, take advantage of the grant programs that are out there. Take advantage of pitch comp. I've seen our entrepreneurs fundraise their entire first seed round through pitch competitions, and don't discount it because it's still a signal of validation that will carry you a long way. And then, I would say, sure, crowdfunding, but I'll respectfully pass it to Gwen because there are clearly pros and cons of how other investors take a look.
Fantastic, Melissa. Thank you. Gwen?
Yeah. Well, Melissa's referring to the fact that there are some angel groups that actually won't allow you to pitch if you've raised crowdfunding for equity, but it's just because of the additional risk that is involved when you then want to go raise additional capital. But I would make the distinction between raising for equity crowdfunding versus product. If you have a product that you can get orders through crowdfunding, I'm hearing a terrible echo.
I know Zoom's saying to us, we're getting close to time.
Okay. So there is a way to, crowdfunding for a product is fabulous because you can demonstrate traction. There's consumer interest. You've got orders. So that's something that hurts no one and really does nothing but help the company. And I would just add to think about your own network, not just friends and family, but maybe you've worked for somebody in the past who knows somebody. And as you've heard, ask for advice, you'll get money. Ask for money, you get advice. I think just expanding that network is really, really worthwhile.
I love that. Love that. Thank you, Gwen. And Desi, round us out. Advice on you've given us some great ones to start with, but anything else that you'd add as to how to get that first little bit of money to get going?
So as I mentioned before briefly, we do some great work with Ulule, which is a community funding, crowdfunding company for women and entrepreneurs. So if somebody's more interested in a little bit more information, please reach out to me. I can connect you. But yeah, I personally believe tremendously in crowdfunding. I think there's a way to do that on your own. Obviously, there's some suitable platforms out there that you can raise money on your own.
Perfect. Well, before I let everybody go, any last parting advice? You've given us so much today, and truly thank you to each of you. You're both inspiring entrepreneurs and leaders within the community that have really taught us and shared a lot of insights and information today. So thank you. But any parting thoughts, any additional comments, one takeaway that I guess you'd wish our entrepreneurs to be thinking about as they leave our session today? Gwen, kick us off. What would you say?
I would say two things. One is some of the most amazing companies have been founded in the most difficult times, and to just not be discouraged, but know that you can demonstrate your scrappiness and tenacity more than when everything's flowing and there's money that's being tossed around. So fabulous times. Also, just know that you really have a lot of power as an entrepreneur. You may not feel that way when you're out raising money, but you can shape and define and just be strong in how you present and honest and open and authentic. You have a lot of power because you're tapped into an opportunity that no one else sees the way you do.
Love that. Desi, what's your words of advice to end us on today?
So, and this is probably gonna come out a little strange coming from somebody you're working for a very conservative conventional bank, but I always say that I have two rules. My first rule is always, I never stop at the first no. I usually wait until the third one. And then my second rule is there are no rules.
I love it. All right. And on that note, Melissa, what are the rules that we're not going to be listening to today? Or what's your takeaway for our entrepreneurs today?
So I'm actually wearing a shirt from one of our entrepreneurs. It says entrepreneur, a crazy person who follows their dreams. So I would say, keep following your dreams and do not let it get deferred by these pandemics and everything else that is happening. Because I think right now, despite what's happening, I am based in DC, putting politics aside, the reality is this country only survives when small business owners create jobs. So we literally need you. And the second thing is be thoughtful in this fundraising process. I think that everything has changed, and therefore everything should be up for discussion and consideration. Venture capital works for some, but not all. Revenue-based financing could be an option. Royalty finance could be an option. The beauty is that so many new funds have come to the marketplace that they are willing to think outside the box, because we finally have the message, one size does not fit all. And so just really take the time to research and be thoughtful, because we all know the first money in determines what you get out at the end. And I'm really sick and tired of seeing entrepreneurs just lose their space and their ownership on the cap table because they have a circuitous path that just did not make sense, but was more popular than what was really more efficient for their type of business.
Perfectly articulated, Melissa. Thank you.
Amen.
All right, to our entrepreneurs joining us today, thank you. Thank you for inspiring, for doing all that you're doing. As you've heard from this panel, you are truly amazing in these times and beyond. Please take a moment, as our ask to you, to complete that feedback that you'll see in the link that's going to go into the chat box in just a moment. That will help us continue to make sure that we're serving up content, education, offerings, and support for you in these times that matter to you. That's why we're here. And then finally, again, stay tuned for some upcoming classes and programs that hopefully continue to address and uncover more optionality for our founders who are doing so much for us in these times. Thank you for joining us today. Take care and be tenacious.